So we're really happy to be here in the Humanities Center Gallery. This is the 24th exhibition to take place in this space since it opened about 5 years ago, right, Brad? 6 years ago now. And so this is a different project for us and different in a number of ways, but probably most because it was curated by the director of the Humanities Center, Clack. And the exhibition is called Gout and the Guillotine. It's been in process for a couple of years now, but why don't you talk about your ideas for putting this exhibition of 18th century British caricatures together?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of strands that led to this thing coming together, and one was a fascination with this central print, the Gout itself by James Gillray. I remember us talking about in a taxi cab in New York City, and then it kind of coalesced with research interests I had in the late 18th century, and principally around the thought and activity of Edmund Burke, who features prominently in this exhibition. There are 4 images of Burke there. And
Can I interrupt you?
Yes, of course.
It needs to be said that we just finished editing the volume of reflections on the French.
Yeah.
So did that have any place in this project for you?
Yeah, very much so. The book itself became something of an obsession for me, not just about Burke himself, but about political and literary culture in the final decade of the 18th century, and the pamphlet war that erupted after Burke's book was published in 1790, with some of the greatest writers of that period, Thomas Paine, Mary Wollstonecraft, Catherine Macaulay, and so on, issuing these violent responses to Burke. So I became fascinated by how vibrant and paranoid and troubled this decade was. And caricatures of Burke feature in the book, of course. I was very happy to include some of these pieces in there. And exploring this a bit further, it became quite apparent that there was this interesting coalescence between political anxiety and physical anxiety, like worries about politics and worries about illness. And the body, which comes out frequently in this exhibition.
Right. Or dismemberment, either by the guillotine or by painful disease, becomes one of the key motifs of caricatures.
Yes, absolutely. There's one of the prints that I've come to love in this exhibition is the Thomas Rowlandson one, Reform Advised, Reform Begun, Reform Complete, which crystallizes, I think, a lot of these things. An issue of British life in this very sort of languid and sturdy form, and then French activity, revolutionary French activity, coming to take hold of a stable British life and reforming it out of existence, as it were. And dismemberment in that image is very central, because the way of trimming down the rather rotund body of John Bull takes the form of taking off one of his legs. In a kind of Freudian lens, of course, dismemberment is a big unconscious fear of losing bodily integrity.
It's not exactly about that big body of John Bull gets reduced by his exposure to French ideas, and actually is physically dismembered as part of its progress.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's right. And amidst all of that stuff, the other big organizing motif of the exhibition is the theme of the gout itself and what that comes to symbolize. You know, it's a really interesting idea of how gout came to symbolize both what was great about a society and what was awful about it. Because the gout sufferer, say in this image to your right of Gilray's punch cures the gout, like he's in a lot of pain, but he's also sort of celebrating his success. I think it was Roy Porter who said that gout was a tax on success. It was a sign that you'd really made something of yourself, because you were the sort of person who could afford the good things in life, beef, pork, the things that would produce gouty sickness. And of course, it's excruciating. And the great image by James Gillray of the gout, which has graced Linda Vista Road, it's in our billboard for about a month now, shows how excruciatingly painful it was. And yet this monarch's disease, was worn as a badge of pride if you were in the ruling class.
And of course, the other great monarch's disease is decapitation.
Yes.
It's happening in France around the same time. Did you know when you first saw the image of Gillray's gout that you were going to make this connection between France and this otherwise seemingly humorous attack on British excess?
No, I didn't. This connection came up while in the midst of putting this together, which was going to be a fairly sort of loose arrangement of prints to indicate something about satirical culture in Britain, and not necessarily in just that one decade. I remember when we first started talking about this, it might have spanned a couple of centuries. But we found, I think, in the course of putting this together, both the 10-year period was quite extraordinary. And that when we started assembling these prints, the same set of anxieties, political invasion, revolutionary turmoil, dismemberment, what disease comes to mean, both in terms of physical health and constitutional health, all that stuff produced this seamless whole, which I think nonetheless is quite a novel way of approaching these prints.
Yeah, I'm so impressed by what you did, Brian. I think it's a small number of works, but they hold together like the argument that you've begun to make, and I think you can continue to make it about the relationship with bodies and pain, and body, the state in disarray. It's pretty convincing.
Well, it's given me a shot in the arm, because having finished the book, I was thinking, well, what the hell am I going to do now? And this seems to be. No, I know. Yeah, this is the next. You're going
to chase British caricatures for the next 10 years.
Yeah, the next 30 years. Yeah, even unto the grave.
It's fun to think about the pamphlet wars that attend Burke's publication, and then this paper war of caricature that's taking place in Georgian England at this time. And even though you brought a small sample of it together, there's a lot more you could do, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know a great deal about the print culture of the late 18th century. I think it's something which is worth talking about. Can you say a little bit about what the culture was like at that period?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think about what artists like Gillray and Rowlandson and Cruikshank are doing. Something akin to what we like on Saturday Night Live. You get this social satire on a regular basis. The contemporary events are getting kind of meaningful punch in the nose by these comic minds. And I think the public in Georgian London was just as interested as we are in seeing our people satirized and given their share of contempt. And so when we look around this gallery, I think we're seeing some reflection of our own attitudes towards political figures who maybe need to be brought face to face with their foibles.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'm thinking about that in relation to the the image behind us. Really, one of my favorite images. And with, as I've said this many times, people are bored of hearing this, but I really think a voluptuary under the horrors of digestion is the greatest name of any artwork that I've encountered. And it's extraordinary. It was a shock to me, exploring this, to see just how tolerated and accepted these really caustic attacks upon members of the monarchy were. I mean, there was no censorship of this. There was no prison time for doing it. I think we have a knee-jerk feeling that, in the 18th century, you couldn't say anything about the king. But these images are extraordinarily cruel.
Yeah, they weren't holding anything back.
Nope.
But even though they didn't censor them, they could send out their agents and buy up every copy of the print that was on the streets, and in that way eliminate something that was particularly sharp and hurtful.
That's interesting. I remember reading somewhere when I was putting this thing together that George IV, as he became, had this extraordinary collection of caricatures, which made me think, well, he appreciated these things. But you made me see that, no, he didn't appreciate them. he just wanted to take them off the street, which is very funny, the image of people running around, getting everything so that nobody could see it.
Right. There's a class of print imagery from this period which shows London folk looking in the windows of these print shops, and they are looking to get the latest news and to see the Prince of Wales be lampooned in various ways that he was done before they disappeared. So they're also a little bit like our eyes on contemporary television.
It's interesting as well. There are three images of the Prince of Wales in this exhibition. Two of them are very mocking and cruel. There's this one, and there's the one of him in his sexual affair with Lady Jersey. And then a few years later, in the image of the promised horrors of the French invasion, he's treated more sympathetically because he's been stabbed and thrown off a balcony by invading.
Better treatment. Actually.
Yes, better treatment. He's less swollen, and also I think Gillray's saying that there's one level of a thing to be disliked, and then there's a whole other level, which is the violence, the beheadings, the cruelty,
that carnivalesque chaos that pervades that scene. So, well, it trumps whatever bad things the Prince of Wales did.
This is right.
They pay all by the
Yes. Yeah.
So the last image in the exhibition, I think, is so well chosen by you. It's this solitary head on a pike, and really brings home both the unrepentant violence of the revolutionary moment, but also the way in which these caricatures could signal big ideas in the most concise form possible. Do you want to talk about this? To bring us home?
Yeah. I find that increasingly a mysterious image. It is the most horrific one in the exhibition. It's kind of nice for us to put it right to the door so you knew what you're getting when you come to the gallery. But the visceral, atavistic horror at decapitation, which is such a big thing at the French Revolution, and now put here, and I don't know if I'm speaking just for myself, but it activates something deep inside me. It's an image. I don't know what Gillray is trying to say in this image. It's Charles James Fox's head, who's the leader of the Whig Party, a radical supporter of the French Revolution, a former friend of Burke, and they split in this very acrimonious way of the French Revolution. And it's his head thrust onto a pike, bleeding over the heads of the other radical Whig politicians like Sheridan, for example. And Gilray's message, it could be, we need to get rid of this threat, this internal threat to our nation. We can only do that by doing away with these people. I don't think he's saying that. He may be saying, this is what happens to sympathizers with a revolution. You yourself end up being a victim of it, which happens frequently. Or he's just maybe saying they're complacent and they don't recognize the horror that they are themselves a part of. But it does very much remind me of what was to come, or call to mind what was to come in the work of Goya and Goya's representations of the disasters of war some decades later.
Right, and I think too of somebody like Honoré Daumier, who also picks up on some of this imagery, his work of the mid-19th century. So it's a wonderful image, a horrific image, but anybody who comes to a show called The Gout and the Guillotine should probably be expecting to see a little bit of that kind of blood when they arrive. So it's no secret that Burke was not universally loved in his lifetime, but he had real adversaries, and one who figures largely in the show is Thomas Paine. And wondered if you talk about the representation of Paine that we see.
Yeah. There's a really great image of Paine here by Isaac Cruikshank. It's interesting to note, we framed this show, as I said, Burke features very heavily in it, and he's being mocked all the time. But Burke is he's the sort of godfather of contemporary conservatism. Not contemporary, modern conservatism. And on the other end of that spectrum, we have Paine, who's really like the progenitor of radicalism in politics. And they knew each other and had early on agreed on certain things of the American Revolution, but they came to loathe each other over this issue of the French Revolution. And Burke is portrayed in our images here largely as a kind of venal sycophant of monarchy. But Paine is represented as this alcohol-sodden, incendiary figure, trampling on received values of loyalty, religion, and hawking these incendiary ideas of rebellion, anarchy, murder, and so on, and listing his accomplishments in his right hand, all his list of books, The Rights of Man. And the drollest moment, I think perhaps in the show, is that he'd written this extraordinary pamphlet in the American Revolution called Common Sense, which Cruikshank calls common nonsense. And he's got all these weapons around him as well. And you've been very good at highlighting how this connects to a classic image from art.
I think so. And that's the other thing to remember about these kinds of caricatures. They operate on multiple levels. And I think Cruikshank and others imagine their viewers being the most educated people in England, as well as folks who may have been illiterate. And so on one hand, you can look at Thomas Paine, and if you're looking closely, you'll notice his sort of swollen red face, which was meant to connote his alcoholism. But you also should know he's posed as the Apollo Belvedere. So he's this godlike figure. And all of that happens simultaneously. And in the way that you described so well, Brian, nobody's spared, right? Whether you're a king or a philosopher or other form of politician, everybody is going to be savaged by these caricatures. And Paine is no exception.
Yeah, that's right. I think also the detail of these images, the more you look at them, every day I come in, I find something new.
Yeah.
And the details in that Cruikshank image of Paine are quite extraordinary. And again, just the other day, just to move off the Paine image for a moment, I was looking at this one, the temperance, enjoying a frugal meal, which is this sort of mockery of George III's touted temperance. And there's a book here by George Cheney, who was one of the most extraordinary figures in health literature in the 18th century. He wrote a lot about gout, as everyone was obsessed with gout in the 18th century. But he was also one of the leading vegetarian advocates of his time. And in a great sort of irony, Cheney was 450 pounds in weight, but advocated a lettuce diet. I find him a most extraordinary figure. And again, that opened up something new for me during this exhibition, of how rich this period is and how full of figures that are often forgotten it is. And we need to retrieve these figures and find out what it was that they were saying, what their relevance for our time is.
You must have really good eyes to read that. I think it says on the benefits of a spare diet.
That's right.
By Cheney.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
you're invited to read these things very closely and to every time.
Certainly. And I would welcome anyone in to look at it. And the people who've come in have found the whole thing deeply, deeply entertaining, funny, and quite extraordinary to see. I'm thrilled that we get to talk about this, and I really want to let you know how much I appreciate all of your effort on this. It's been a pleasure. Well, thank you. I appreciate all of your effort to make it come to fruition. Really could not have done it without you and the team at University Gallery. It's been a joy. Thank you. Yeah.